Hello, friends. Today I want to talk about another musician. I want to do one of those musician-focused things. Another guitar player, big fan of guitar playing, so I talk a lot about guitars and guitar players. And one of my favorite guitar players is also one of my favorite band leaders, songwriter, singer types. He started off as a kind of not, I wouldn't, only listening to the first album that he did, I wouldn't have followed him from there, you know what I mean? But I discovered him kind of later. His first album was a little bit like singer-songwriter, almost folky, but still had some quirky elements to it. I'm talking about Bill Nelson. And his band that he started right after that first album. There was a first album called Northern Dream, which get it if you're a Bill Nelson completist. It's not terrible. The songs are okay. You can hear the promise in there of what he was going to develop into as a songwriter. But the first album that he did that I think is on the path is the first album in his band that was called Be-Bop Deluxe. That was his band, his first band. And their first album is called Axe Victim, and it's got this cover. It's it's kind of a classic guitar as skull album cover. And it was kind of a bit of a glam kind of a thing, like sort of a dark, almost goth glam thing. Because look at him on the back here. Check him out with the makeup and all. That's Bill Nelson right there with a guitar. And I think that, you know, the fact that the very first image on the first proper album is a guitar and a sort of mythologized idea of a guitar being this sort of rock and roll, devilish kind of rock and roll thing is a theme that runs through his early music. He did a lot of music about being a rock star, about the rock star life. This one has a few songs on here that are, you know, Axe Victim and a few of the other songs. There's one on here called Jet Silver and the Dolls of Venus, which may kind of bring to mind something like Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, which I think his first, Bill Nelson's first album was a little bit like the early Bowie record, you know, the very first Bowie records. And this one is a bit like the Ziggy Stardust. It's like his Ziggy Stardust album, where I think they're sort of playing these kind of characters that are living this dark goth kind of, I don't know, like proto-goth life of on the road, you know, the rock star on the road. And it's kind of that sort of mythologizing the idea of being in a band. Romanticizing is probably a better way to put it, but the idea that it's this heroic thing to sling a guitar, to be a guitar player up on the stage, and to, you know, night after night, sort of like, you know, the idea that some rock bands would write songs about being in a rock band and would sort of elevate that lifestyle or that legend, the legend, you know, up to this, you know, like mythological status. And I think that's what a lot of pop stars were thinking back then, that they were doing something kind of heroic, I guess. You get the impression from Bowie that he was playing that character of someone who was this heroic, almost like a rock and roll martyr, you know. The Stones did a bit of that too. And talking about, you know, on the stage, you know. But Bill Nelson did that. It was a kind of a conscious thing where he wrote these songs that glorified the guitar and the guitar player and the rock singer. The second album, the second Be-Bop Deluxe album, is a fantastic record. This is where it all started to kick in here. I think this one's called Futurama. And it's got, you know, more songs about being in a band or being a performer, stage whispers, and it's got, this is the album that's got the couple of classics on it. This song called Made in Heaven, Sister Seagull, Swan Song, Between Two Worlds, Music in Dreamland. These are all really good albums. The Be-Bop Deluxe entire discography is great. All of the albums are good, all of them, and they take you on a kind of a journey from that first one with the skull head guitar through these sort of futurist kind of what will music sound like in the future, I think was what he was going for. The title is Futurama. He still puts records out like crazy. Kind of obsessed with that kind of future nostalgia, the future that never was, the future that we imagined in these days was coming, but kind of an idealized version of it, romanticized, of course, rock and rollified, you know. But this is a classic album, and I mean, Made in Heaven is a classic. The songs are really good. The songwriting is great on these albums. That's the second one. Third one, Sunburst Finish, which is got the classic kind of controversial album cover. I wonder why. But it's, you know, again, a guitar on fire here. The idea, he's got this fascination with the legendary status of the electric guitar. I think it's here we see it, you know, on fire because it's just got so much power. This one is called Sunburst Finish, which is a classic title, I think, because Sunburst Finish is the finish on a guitar, the paint job on a guitar that's a sunburst. And it's, I'll show you one. It's that kind of where it's got like a sunburst right there. This is a sunburst finish. So cool. I think he was wanting to elevate the guitar to a mythological weapon, you know, like the sword, the Excalibur. And so that is interesting about the music. It's also fun. I don't think he was taking himself too seriously, because you get the idea too that he's doing the sort of Bowie thing where he's playing a character. You know, I don't think he carried that with him off stage. He's probably, you know, I mean, a regular person like the rest of us, but when he was on stage, I think he had kind of that mythological guitar god kind of feel to him. Not so much in America, but I think in the UK, people really liked Be-Bop Deluxe. They loved Bill Nelson. I mean, they still do. He, for a while there, I don't know if these are still going on, but they used to have these conventions, these Bill Nelson conventions where people would get together. Bill Nelson would show up and perform new music, and people would trade records and whatever else. I don't know, just kind of chat about how grand it was when they saw, you know, Be-Bop Deluxe play at the so-and-so at, you know, whenever. It was, it's the kind of music that people carry with them, because it does kind of give you that feeling of the great feeling you got from seeing a live band play, and they were larger than life. The next album that they did was called Modern Music, which is this one right here, which is another classic album. They're basically all classics, I think. They're this one's got a kind of a flow to it. The songs kind of mesh together. It's a fun one to listen to, side A, side B. And oddly enough, it was pretty radical when you think about back in these days when this came out. The idea that these guys had kind of short hair and were wearing suits and ties, that was pretty radical. And even just wearing a watch is kind of a radical look, because back at this time, I think it was the ending moments of the kind of dinosaur rock, the long hair, scraggly kind of rock and roll 70s vibe right before new wave and punk rock came in. They kind of predated that a little bit, and kind of, I mean, this ended up looking a bit like what music looked like in the future. He was predicting, I guess, what music was going to be like in the future, and so therefore what bands were going to look like in the future with suits and ties, which is interesting because that happened. But what's interesting, he's wearing this sort of futuristic Dick Tracy watch with a TV screen on it, like an Apple Watch. But look what's on the watch there. It's the skull guitar from his first album. Pretty cool. But anyway, Modern Music, great album. His band was incredible. And there's another picture of the cool watch. But then after this one, he did a album where he started kind of moving out into an area that he was going to stay in for quite a while. I think he's still in this area somewhat, which is kind of like him doing everything, him playing all the instruments or almost all the instruments, or basically conducting the whole thing rather than the democracy of a band. I think it started becoming the Bill Nelson project. It was him. His band's still great, still contributing, but I think Bill Nelson was kind of pushing the band into a direction that he was really wanting to go. Their last album is called Drastic Plastic, which is a very new wave kind of a name, and the cover has got those bright colors and kind of a new wave look to the cover. The songs are very electronic sounding. There is a mechanical beat to it, a mechanical feeling, an electronic pop feeling. There's a little bit of that metronomic Kraftwerk inspired, almost inspired a little bit by the German pop bands, German rock, progressive, krautrock they call it. A little bit of that vibe in here, bands like Can and things like that, to my ears. But then it's got a more poppy feel to it because the songs are just so catchy and so poppy. There they are, the band with television heads, which is very new wave and very I don't know, kind of predictive of the new wave vibe that was on the way. There's Bill Nelson on the floor because his head is got some interference going on. But yeah, this is a great album. This was pretty almost sort of a concept album about the future. It's kind of Devo-like in a way, as far as how he's talking about the future and how our technology is eating us up, and it's very tech. I don't want to say techno, but technological, which at the time was a bit radical. It was kind of a different thing than you were used to hearing from your pop bands, especially Be-Bop Deluxe. And that was their last album, and they were really well known for doing really good live shows, really good live concerts. And one album, I believe this might be the album that I discovered them with, and it's a great live album. Actually, I'm not a big fan of live albums, but this one actually has a feel to it. I like it. There's a song on one of the albums called "Life in the Air Age." So this one's kind of a play on words here. It's called "Live in the Air Age," and it's got a picture from the movie Metropolis on the front, which is so cool. And it comes with a bonus album, and that cool black and white cover is augmented so well by the white vinyl in here. And more pictures from Metropolis on the back. But this album is really good for a live album. One thing that this has that friends of mine and I have talked about a lot, guitar playing friends of mine, musician friends, it's got some amazing guitar playing on there. If you're into guitar playing, if you're into that sort of rock, the rock star, rock god guitar soloing, he does that really well. He plays guitar solos that are very melodic, seem to have been written in advance. They aren't just, like a million notes per second shreddy stuff. He's actually got these beautiful melodic guitar solos. There seems to maybe be a little bit of improvisation involved in some, but I believe he worked these out. He's very meticulous. These albums really sort of display a kind of meticulous aspect to the production the arrangements and the songwriting, the structure of the song. Very well constructed songs. So his guitar solos are often very well constructed and beautiful, just beautifully flowing. But they have that aspect to them that I keep talking about here, that sort of almost like heroic, the Guitar Hero kind of vibe. There are these soaring guitar solos. He does these things where they climb and they ascend, and there's this sustain and larger than life kind of rock and roll vibe to the guitar playing, the guitar soloing particularly. And his voice is unusual. He's got a great voice. He sings and plays this complicated guitar stuff at the same time, which is pretty amazing when you seek out some videos on YouTube. But he sings in a kind of it's hard to describe his voice. He doesn't really sound like anybody else. He doesn't sound like he's trying to mimic anyone or sound like Bowie or someone like that. He's got his own interesting tonality, his own timbre, and a little bit of a vibrato that he does that I don't know who else does a vibrato like he does when he's singing. And it just does great lyrics as well. The lyrics, like I was talking about, are those a lot of times about futuristic things, about space age kind of stuff, a lot of nostalgia for the future that never happened, like I was saying. And after those albums, after the whole Be-Bop Deluxe thing, he went and did some solo albums. He did a band first of all after Be-Bop Deluxe. He put a band together called Bill Nelson's Red Noise, or maybe just Red Noise. When this came out, it didn't sound like anything else I'd ever heard. It's very electronic, very metronomic. It's like a poppier version of Devo, perhaps. It's got some of that Devo vibe to it, and he is very, but it's got this angsty. See how angsty he is there in the corner? It looks like some mirrored room that he's in, and he's still wearing a watch there, and it's got a heavy angst on this album. And this is like Drastic Plastic. This takes that idea a little bit further. The idea that technology is taking over, and even though he embraces technology and seems to have a kind of nostalgia for technology, he also seems to be a little bit wary of it as well. Like, things are becoming, we are becoming robots, that kind of idea, So the music reflects this manic kind of anxiety of technology invading, taking over. But you also maybe get the impression that he doesn't mind so much, if it takes over. Maybe it's nice. Maybe it's all right. Maybe we'll have cooler guitars. He's still playing the guitar here, but a lot of people who loved his guitar playing were getting maybe a little bit disappointed that he was moving away from that Guitar Hero thing that he was doing with Be-Bop Deluxe so well. And he was playing guitar less. A lot of this is keyboards and programming, drum programming, keyboards and things like that. Synth pop, and there's still guitar and bass, but it's not as upfront as it was with Be-Bop Deluxe. He's sort of leaning into the electro pop vibe here. This one is a really great album, The Love That Whirls. It's not quite as manic, not as anxiety fueled as the Red Noise and perhaps Drastic Plastic. This is getting a little bit more into electronic pop that's actually kind of maybe a little bit Roxy Music, like maybe Avalon era Roxy Music. Orchestral maneuvers kind of feel to it, a little bit of Depeche Mode, a little bit, but all done in that Bill Nelson feel. This has got some great songs on here. Empire of the Senses, Flaming Desire. Check this one out. Check it out. Look up some of these on YouTube if you want to hear what Bill Nelson was doing after Be-Bop Deluxe. Look up Flaming Desire by Bill Nelson on YouTube. That will give you an idea kind of what this album is leaning more towards a kind of sophisticated pop vibe rather than that kind of insane, manic electronic, electrocution kind of rock and roll that was going on with the Red Noise album. But this is a little bit more sophisticated, I guess that's the word. Sophisticated electronic pop. The Love That Whirls, Diary of a Thinking Heart. An album, like a mini album, Chimera, which is really nice. This has got The Real Adventure on here. Tender is the Night, Glow World. Those were impeccably produced, beautifully arranged, very catchy pop songs that had a heavy electronic vibe to them. He was doing some soundtrack music. Every so often he would release an album that would be a soundtrack to something. One of the first ones he did, I believe, maybe the first one, not sure, is the soundtrack for The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is an old black and white silent horror film. Bill Nelson, Das Kabinett. This is a very ambient album that has a real mood. It's got a real feeling to it, and it works so well. You listen to this music, it's not pop music, it is soundtrack music, and you really get the feel of the German Expressionism feel. I know that he was really working on the sound, the tonalities, to try to get a feel of that kind of expressionism at the time, the feel of this music. Of the film, and I think it really works. If you listen to this, you can find it on YouTube. I think it's public domain. Das Kabinett, the silent film, and put it on. I don't know how the music worked with the movie, but it was interesting to just watch it and play the record and kind of get a vague feel of what it must have been like. And it's a fascinating story. The movie is pretty cool, but the music has a real mood and it's ambient. And Bill Nelson went into ambient zones after this, a bit like people like David Sylvian, who was in the band Japan. Japan is sort of like David Sylvian's Be-Bop Deluxe. It was the band that he was in, and then afterwards he kind of delved into his own feelings, his own ideas, apart from the band. And that's what Bill Nelson did. He went into his own place with music and sort of didn't have to be the democracy that a band is sometimes, where you have to let them contribute. He didn't, I think he felt like maybe he didn't need that. He knew how to do it. He could play a lot of different instruments. He played guitar, keyboards, drums, bass, and sing, of course, and all really well. And he probably felt like, I can do all that. I can do all the stuff. And then we don't have to, explain. I don't have to teach somebody or explain to somebody. This is another one, The Twofold Aspect of Everything, which is a double album, and it's full of really great songs. More of those sort of electronic feeling pop songs, electronic pop, I guess, but a little bit more sophisticated than a lot of the other stuff that was happening at the time. Like I mentioned before, David Sylvian did a bit more sophisticated work than he had done in Japan. And I'm not putting down Japan, but I think when he went off on his own, he was exploring music that wasn't sort of second-guessing the market. He wasn't trying to sell records or be a pop star anymore. He kind of moved into a place where it was like, I'm not trying to please the record label now with another pop album that might have a hit or two. I'm doing music that I want to do. And that's what and these are just some of the early ones. He has continued through all this time to release albums, and they're all good. I mean, he hasn't lost his intensity at all. And he's also collaborated with a lot of people. He's collaborated with David Sylvian. He's been a producer. He's produced a lot of albums and, collaborations. He, notoriously worked on the album Warrior with Gary Newman, and they had a huge disagreement. Bill Nelson took his name off of it, and I think now they're friends again. But I think there was some issue there, kind of reminiscent of the Todd Rundgren producing XTC incident. There was a little clash of personalities and musical intentions and things like that. But he also produced A Flock of Seagulls and a bunch of other bands, and he had some great collaborations. He worked with the guys from the Yellow Magic Orchestra, like Ryuichi Sakamoto and all those guys. And he did, it's hard to count how many records. If you go on Wikipedia, look up Bill Nelson, look up his discography, and then scroll down forever and check out his collaborations. Just endless. How can you be that busy if there's only one of you? But one random collaboration that I have here, one of my videos I've gotten like a lot of people commenting, is about the bass player from Japan, David Sylvian's band, Mick Karn, who also played on a bunch of albums, collaborated, and Bill Nelson and Mick Karn found themselves playing together on a collaboration by a musician named Masami Tsuchiya, who made this album called Rice Music, which is a very upbeat, poppy, kind of a dance album. But it's got Mick Karn on here, and it's got a few other interesting people on here. Steve Jansen, and also Percy Jones plays bass too. Percy Jones is another fantastic bass player. But it's also got Bill Nelson on here, and he is credited on here with playing the flying E-bow guitar by Bill Nelson. And around this time, Bill Nelson was using a technique or a device called an E-bow, which I remember a lot of people saying, what does that mean, flying E-bow guitar? It's this soaring sound that you hear on here. It's a sustain. It's like a guitar that sustains forever. It's almost like a violin vibe where you run the bow across the strings and it keeps the string vibrating. It's an electronic device that I have shown before on the podcast because I have a vintage one, very much like the one that Bill Nelson would have had, in a little leather thing that you can put on your guitar strap. But it's this shiny, cool metal object that you hold over the strings. You may see it in some videos, especially if you look at Bill Nelson videos around this era. He'd hold it over the string. He's not strumming. He's not playing with a pick. He's just holding this metal thing over the strings. The strings go into these sort of trenches here, and in the center trench, there's a magnetic field that vibrates the string at a solid rate. It keeps the string making a tone. So you hold that over, and then you just sort of slide to different notes on the neck, and it has this really cool sound that's now, I guess, associated with the 80s and some, folks like Bill Nelson, particularly Bill Nelson. I can't really think of anyone else who played it as much and actually put a credit on their flying E-bow guitar by Bill Nelson. But that's one collaboration that he did. He did a bunch of others. He worked with David Sylvian. He worked with a ton of people. I don't want to get into it yet. I may make this part one where I talk about Bill Nelson, Be-Bop Deluxe, and the beginning of his solo career, or his career outside of Be-Bop Deluxe, his post-band career. There's so much more, and there's so many other places that he went with the music. But in summary, what I like about Bill Nelson is the songwriting. His songwriting is top-notch, always good, always interesting, always going places that you may not expect, and yet he is very consistent with his conceptual ideas. He goes a lot into, like I was saying, like this nostalgia for a future, for a unfound future. you know, the jetpacks and the rocket ships and things like that. The sort of pre-Star Trek, Star Wars kind of science fiction that maybe he maybe imprinted on him when he was a kid, and really loved the, you know, the earlier science fiction things that he would see on television. And I believe a lot of his music has been his attempt to capture that feeling of nostalgia for a magical, high-tech future that never came to pass. And another future came to pass, a future that no science fiction writers were predicting actually happened. But his sort of innocent nostalgia for the futurist stuff, that he did a song called Futurist Manifesto, and there's definitely a feeling of longing for that world of flying cars and jetpacks and rocket ships and outer space stuff and guitars that look like that kind of 50s vibe. He has a huge collection of guitars. Guitars have also been a thread through all of his work. The idea of the guitar, the concept of what a guitar is and what it represents in rock and roll and pop music, and his approach to the guitar, which is very meticulous and very forward thinking in a way. He goes into the future with his guitar. I think one of the things he may have been saying to himself conceptually is that I want to make music that is going to be sort of like what music is like in 50 years or 20 years or something, like imagining what the future, like when you see these old 60s science fiction movies and they have people dancing in the nightclub. Somebody at the film studio said, we need to get a musician to write music that doesn't sound like music of when we made the film. It needs to sound like music in the future. And I think that idea maybe fascinated Bill Nelson, and that, I believe, is why he pushed the technology on his first post-band albums and did such technocentric music. It's about technology, using technology, and you get that feeling from it. And then he kind of leveled it out a little bit for some of the later albums, toned it down a little bit, and made it, you know, kept the technology and the futurist idea, but he brought it into more of a, that word I was using, sophisticated pop realms. So that's what I think about the early days of Bill Nelson. I could go on, and I probably will. I'm probably going to do a part 2 of this. But for now, I think that's what I'm going to say about Bill Nelson, Be-Bop Deluxe, and his first first area of his solo work, and some early collaborations. Great stuff. It's a huge rabbit hole. You know, like I said, go to the wiki page, go down to his discography and look through there. It's like one of those things like, oh, I could never be a collector, a Bill Nelson collector, because then you would have to have a separate room for all of your Bill Nelson records. But he's done a lot of work. He still does a lot of work. He'll put out sometimes like 3. I think in 2022, he put out 3 albums. So 2023, he put out another bunch of albums. And 2024, I just got an email saying that there's another album coming up. An email from the Bill Nelson people, not from Bill personally. We're not buddies. But the email is like, Bill Nelson has a new album coming out. And I'm like, yeah, another one. Okay, good. And it's, you know, it's probably going to be great. He does good stuff. He still cares. He still puts a lot of care and attention into the recording. So someone I still follow. And that's about it. That's what I'm going to say about Bill Nelson. I could go on, and this one is, I think this is like the 4-hour podcast, and hopefully you've made it this far. I can endure my endless talking. I'm trying to talk fast on this one so I can get a lot of information in. I put, I think, more records in this one than any of the other ones. But it's interesting stuff. It's fun to go through and follow through the career, see the ups and the downs. Some of the stuff is incredible. Some of it not as incredible. but the next one he'll take it right back up to incredible. But follow Bill Nelson. It's good stuff. It's good quality music from the future. And I hope you enjoyed this. I hope I didn't rant and rave too quickly. I was really trying to fit it all in. But thanks for joining me, and I will talk to you again real soon.